Hello there, friends and neighbors. Thanks so much for coming back to my channel. This is me, Stella Hendricks, and today we are going to read the Dorothy Stratten tribute article inside the May 1981 Playboy. It is pretty long, but I'm going to read most of it. So one thing that has kind of bugged me about a lot of things written about Dorothy Stratten is that they started off in one of these books I read with Snively's story, and then in this one they started off with Nellie, her mom's story. So there's a certain person in this story whose name we don't say because we do not say the names of evil people who are dead because we don't want to invoke their spirit. This is just part of my kind of witchy personal belief type deal thing. So in here I have blacked out his name wherever I have found it, and I will continue to do so. If I find one that I missed, I came prepared. But I do want to read the vast majority of this because even if I think it's weird that they tell so much of her mom's story in something that is supposed to be about Dorothy, I think that's kind of weird. But I also know that, Dorothy died very young, and a lot of the information they would have about her would come from her mom. She was still very close to a child when she passed away, so I can see that aspect of it. Also, I really don't like going into the gory details about, what happened, and so I kind of skip over goriness where I can, because I like to remember the beauty of people, and I like to leave roses on tombstones. I don't like to, jig up all the nasty horribleness. I like to memorize or memorialize them through beautiful things. So, in that spirit, here we go. Dorothy Stratten, 1980 Playmate of the Year. Her life is what she left, and it is worth knowing. Holland, 1940. Petronella Fuchs, 5 years old, played at home alone. Her father had been arrested by the Germans and taken away. Her mother was at work. The house was unheated and there wasn't any food, so the neighbors called the police. The police came and took Petronella to an orphanage. Her mother wanted her back, but the court wouldn't release her. She grew up at the orphanage. It was wartime and the orphanage served the most basic food. Mashed potatoes with vegetables stirred into them, a drizzle of bacon grease for taste, a meatball with the potatoes on Wednesday, and on Sunday, a small piece of meat. The children went out from the orphanage in groups, walking 3 in a row. 1, 2, 3. Once a year, they went, this article is by Richard Rhodes and the editors of Playboy, based in part on the research of John Riley and Laura Bernstein. To the beach on the streetcar. For weeks afterwards, they relived the streetcar trip. The world entered the orphanage through the front door. Petronella won the important work of opening that door to visitors. She opened the door one day in her late adolescence to a woman looking for an orphanage girl willing to work at a dentist's office. The woman chose Petronella, who was blonde, blue-eyed, with a broad Dutch forehead, not tall, innocent. She was filled with gratitude for the choice. At the dentist's office, Petronella met a young man, Simon Hoogstraten. There's a Hoogstraten. I think it's actually Hoogstraten. He was tall, with dark hair and glasses and strong hands. He was a carpenter, well-trained, a craftsman. In time, he asked Petronella to marry him. She was 18 and she hardly knew him, but she wanted out of the orphanage. It reminds me of Marilyn Monroe. She would not normally be released, not even for marriage, until she was 21. Hoogstraten thought he could win early release for her if he arranged for them to emigrate. She accepted his proposal. He went to the orphanage and met with its board, men of the cloth, churchmen. He passed out cigars. Where did he intend to emigrate? Canada. Why Canada? The country was seeking people with skills. He was a carpenter. They would pay his passage one way. The churchmen liked the cigars. Feeling good, they agreed. Simon Hoogstraten and Petronella Fuchs were married at the orphanage in the spring of 1954. The new bride was not allowed to leave the orphanage until the day of her departure from Holland, 2 weeks after the wedding. She joined her husband at the airport. They huddled with other Dutch immigrants in transit at Heathrow Airport in London. None of them spoke more than a few words of English. When one ordered orange juice, they all ordered orange juice. When one ordered eggs, they all ordered eggs. On arrival at Vancouver, British Columbia, the Strattens had $40 between them, but Simon found work. He was a carpenter, and there's always work for carpenters. He built houses. Petronella decided that her name was confusing. She shortened it to Nellie. Nellie Stratten. Stratten. I'm so used to saying Stratten, but I think it is Stratten. A young Dutch woman in Canada. Vancouver was like Holland, cool and green, but the people were different. Even the people in the Dutch community. They wanted to get things fast. In the old country, you couldn't get things fast. After 5 years of marriage, the couple still hadn't started a family. Nellie returned to Holland with a girlfriend. The girlfriend rented a car and they spent 2 weeks touring. Nellie had never seen her home country. She was reunited with her mother and the change did her good. Not long after she got back to Vancouver, she became pregnant. Simon bought 4 building lots on a green hillside in Vancouver's East End, planned 4 houses, drew his own blueprints. He built the houses entirely on his own. One he rented, 2 he sold. The 4th was for him and Nellie and the baby. While he was building it, he installed his expectant wife in a tiny cottage across the street. She kept a garden and waited. The baby, a strong, healthy girl, was born at the Salvation Army Hospital in Vancouver on February 28, 1960, near midnight. The Strattens named her Dorothy Ruth. The house wasn't ready, and Simon worked hard to finish it. It had 3 bedrooms, a nursery, central heating, a picture window, and red tile steps. Nellie would nurse the baby while she watched Simon build it. Dorothy's younger brother, Johnny, was born 2 years later, but neither family nor prosperity kept Simon home. He worked long hours. He worked at night. He was always working. Nellie became disillusioned. She was alone so much. She told her husband he ought to be a horse. He worked so hard. Nellie's next child was stillborn. She discovered she was an Rh negative mother. When Dorothy was 3, her father abandoned them. There was another woman in his life. Nellie had been given only a grade school education in Holland, and her English was still halting. Abruptly and unexpectedly, she had children to support. Simon offered grudgingly to come home to her, but Nellie said no. If he didn't want her, she didn't want him. She was still young and able to work. If she had known then how difficult it would be, she would have taken Simon back. I suppose that must be something that she said later on, or that's quite a presumptuous statement to make. Also, I know from other documentaries and other things that I've read and looked at that she took the kids to go home to Holland for like a visit with relatives, and when she came back, the house was sold and Simon had pretty much left her hanging. He sounds like a complete bastard if you want to know the truth. I would have told him to take a hike too, but I would have wanted some child support as well. Ugh, that guy. Every adult in Dorothy's life fails her. It's so sad. Anyway, Nellie found employment as a housekeeper. She moved to an upstairs apartment in the poorest part of the East End. One night when it was raining, Nellie walked to a nearby bridge and looked down into the black water. She was despondent. She might have jumped, but she slipped and fell on the wet sidewalk. A couple passing in a car saw her fall and stopped, coaxed her into their car, and drove her home. Her downstairs neighbor made tea for her, and then she went upstairs to her children. The children were sleeping. Nellie thought, "They didn't ask to come into this world. I can't leave them here alone." She went to see a psychiatrist at a mental health clinic. He gave her a little bottle of pills. The pills were supposed to help her, but they put her to sleep. She would wake in the middle of the evening to find the refrigerator door open. The children had been trying to reach the milk. There would be cornflakes spilled on the floor. This can't go on, Nellie told herself. It was time she smartened up. She stopped seeing the psychiatrist, stopped taking the pills. She meant to survive, meant to keep her children and to raise them. She had grown up in an orphanage. Her children would grow up with a mother and a home. So there's some beautiful pictures. Nellie went on social assistance and worked as much as its income limitation allowed. She managed to make a down payment on a house, a cottage not much bigger than an average American living room. Whatever happened, she always wanted to have a house. Making the mortgage payments was hard. Better to eat dry bread and pay the mortgage, she told herself. There were stores in Vancouver that sold horse meat. The children couldn't tell the difference. To them, it tasted good. When Dorothy was 6, Nellie became pregnant again. Nellie worked for the father as a housekeeper. She believed he loved her and might marry her. She told him at Christmas time after he had given her an expensive gift. "You'll have to prove it's mine," he shouted angrily. "You'll have to prove it." Nellie considered abortion. Because of her previous problems, her Rh negative condition made it a legal choice in Canada. Approval took 4 months. Jesus. Nellie lay in a bed in the hospital. The abortion was scheduled for that morning, but the baby kicked. It was her first time she had felt it move inside her. She got up, walked down the hall, and called a cab. Her doctor came running. "We've gone to all this trouble," he argued with her, "and now you want to keep it." She did. Good for her. I'm all for a woman's right to choose, and it's the woman's right to choose. She made one choice, she changed her mind, consent can be withdrawn. So good for you. If that's what you felt was right. God, if you can't afford the kids you have, I don't know that that's the decision I would have made, but that's the decision she made. Good for her. Louise, Dorothy's younger sister, was delivered by cesarean section and survived a complete blood exchange. Wow. Nellie loved her 3 children with an orphan's fierce, determined love. They moved to a cabin in the mountains, but it was dangerously isolated in winter. After a frightening blizzard, Nellie moved them back to Vancouver. They moved 6 times that year. They were living again in Vancouver's East End. It was a rough part of town. Dorothy missed having a father. She knew her father had walked out on them, and she dreamed of being famous someday so that he would know and notice her and be sorry. She was the oldest. She took that responsibility seriously. She helped her mother whenever she could. She made sure Johnny got up for school, helped Louise dress. In school, Dorothy studied nutrition. She and her classmates were supposed to keep daily diaries of what their families ate so the teacher could show them how to eat better. Dorothy kept a diary for her family and showed her mother what she had learned. Exhibition Park, beside the Burrard Inlet, was an easy walk in summer from their house. Dorothy took her brother and little sister to the park for the day. They rode the roller coaster. Dorothy watched the people coming and going from the racetrack and the big stadium. Sometimes the 3 of them walked down to the water and watched the boats. In the winter, Nellie took them to Burnaby Mountain Park, into Burnaby on Hastings Street. They took cardboard boxes or saucer sleds and sledded down the mountain. There was an observation deck on the roof of the park restaurant where they could stand and look out over the trees to the mountains on the other side of the inlet. Around them were fresh, dark evergreens weighed down with snow. Burnaby Mountain was fun. Dorothy collected costume jewelry, but she didn't have a jewelry box, so she decided to make one out of plywood with wire for the hinges. She painted the box pink and painted a big red heart on the lid. She brought her girlfriends home from school and Nellie made them Dutch pancakes. The girls played. Dorothy came out in a big hat and one of Nellie's dresses. She wobbled trying to walk in her mother's high-heeled shoes. When she was 14, Dorothy and her best friend Cheryl went up and down the East End looking for jobs at places like Ernie's Take Home and Fabric Lane. They stopped in at the Dairy Queen Brazier restaurant? What the heck? On Hastings Street. The owner was a burly, black-bearded man named Dave Redlick. While they waited for him to interview them, they bounced on the couch in his office and giggled. He almost caught them. Dorothy was tall for her age and looked older than her years. Redlick liked her and hired her. He hired Cheryl also. He showed Dorothy where they kept the red and brown plaid smocks and the girls wore and introduced her to the girl she'd be working with. After that, Dorothy worked at the Dairy Queen on weekends. She was a hard worker. She never missed a day. She liked school. A lot of the kids in the East End cut classes. She never did, and she made sure Johnny and Louise didn't either. But the kids who were there But the kids who were out there, but the kids who did were out there when she walked home. They taunted and teased her. Because she was tall and skinny, they called her Beanpole. Because she was shy, they said she was stuck up. They said she had big lips, beady eyes, no tits. She tried to ignore them, but it was hard to do. When they were hanging out together in the street at night, she'd be studying her lessons or helping Nellie at home, and they hated her for it. Then an older brother of one of the girls who used to tease her caught Dorothy one afternoon after school. He spat in her face and slapped her. He knocked her down and kicked her. When Nellie came home from work, Dorothy told her mother what had happened. It made Nellie angry, and behind the anger it frightened her. "Mom," Dorothy said proudly, "I didn't cry." Oh my God, I think that is so telling of the massively repressive environment that poor Dorothy grew up in, that she was proud to have been injured but to not cry. Like, oh, there's a lot in that. That just hit me. About that time, Johnny started getting into trouble, and someone broke into their house and stole most of their belongings. Damn. The neighborhood was so bad that Dave Redlick started driving Dorothy home on the back of his motorcycle when she had to work late at the Dairy Queen. Nellie decided they had to move. She found a house in Coquitlam, a suburb east of Vancouver. By then, Nellie was studying for her secondary school equivalency, training in practical nursing and working in a hospital. They were still on social assistance. Coquitlam wasn't fancy, but it wasn't poor either. The house in Coquitlam was bigger than any of the four had ever lived in. Finally, Dorothy had her own room. It was only 8 by 10 feet, but it had a closet with sliding doors and a window that looked out into a backyard. It was beautiful. Dorothy took the bus into Vancouver on weekends to work at the Dairy Queen. At night, Dave would put her on the bus to Coquitlam and then call Nellie, who would drive to the bus stop to meet her daughter and take her home. It was hard to pay the mortgage for the larger house, and Nellie had her hands full. She didn't have much time to talk to her children. Sometimes she would pass the door to Dorothy's room and hear her daughter crying and not know what to do. Dorothy was 15. It was near the end of the school year when they moved. She didn't know anyone at the new school. Dorothy collected stamps. Stamps told the stories of other people in other places. She liked mounting them in the album and then dreaming about the people and places. She started a hope chest. She learned to knit and made sweaters for it. She learned to crochet and began crocheting a throw. She made doilies for the furniture she would have one day in her own home. For her last 2 years of high school, Dorothy went to Centennial Senior Secondary. She liked Centennial, but she was so shy that most of her classmates hardly noticed her. "I never wore makeup or fancy clothes," she would later recall, "and I was scared to death of people." She got good grades and did best in her creative writing and secretarial courses. There was a rumor around school that one of their teachers had once appeared in Playboy. Dorothy thought it was very strange because the teacher wasn't very pretty. Then Dorothy began to blossom. Her striking 5'9" frame, all awkward angles and adolescence, began to fill out with sexual maturity. Her Dutch heritage showed in her fine features and clear, luminous skin. Do the Dutch have clear, luminous skin? Good for them. Her long blonde hair became lustrous and set off hazel blue eyes. The cool Vancouver air put color in her cheeks. The beanpole was on her way to becoming a beautiful woman, but she would be the last to realize it. In her junior year, Dorothy began dating her first serious boyfriend. What impressed her the most about him when they met was his car, a Camaro. He was good looking, she would write later, but a little much. He had an apple and a carton of milk in one hand and a burger in the other, trying to get them all in his mouth at the same time. When he tried to say hi, everything came spurting out of his face, and I broke up laughing. It was a rocky romance. She reflected on it later in a notebook of personal reminiscences and poetry that she started writing after she arrived in Hollywood. "I don't know what attracted me to him. I had to keep making myself believe that I really loved him. I thought I loved him because he was my boyfriend, and we went out for a long time and we slept together. I knew something wasn't right. If that was love, love was a pretty big letdown. And I was always afraid of breaking up because I thought I wouldn't know what to do without him. But I'm sure many of my troubles and problems were my own fault. Oh, honey. Dorothy's fear of being without a boyfriend kept the relationship going for more than a year. She even bought him a ruby ring. It cost $70. She paid for it in installments out of earnings from her part-time job, $5 at a time. On odd weekends, when she wasn't babysitting or working at the Dairy Queen, they would go out to a movie or dinner, pizza or Chinese. More often, they spent the evening at her house or his, drinking and watching TV. Sex was a constant conflict. Sometimes Dorothy thought it was all he wanted her for. He never even saw her naked. She took her clothes off under the covers. I don't know what there was to be ashamed of, she wondered later, but I was. Sex with him included none of the romance she longed for. Yet, not valuing her own worth, she blamed herself. There was nothing wrong with him. It was me. Dorothy tried to break up the relationship at the start of her senior year, but she felt so empty and alone, she went back to him. They fought continually that fall and winter. On a weekend of skiing at Whistler Mountain, a good-looking boy named Craig paid attention to her, and it made him mad. He argued with her on the long drive home. He'd had it with her, he said. He took off the ruby ring she'd given him and crushed it with a pair of pliers. What a dick. After that, she didn't go out with anyone for more than a month. Dorothy turned 18 in February of 1978. It was embarrassing to still be working at the Dairy Queen at 18. At first, I was 14 years old. It was great to get work that young, but I turned 15 and 16 and 17, and at 18, I was still working there, wearing a little red uniform with my hair in pigtails. One weekend, a black Datsun 240Z with a red leather and upholstery pulled into the Dairy Queen parking lot. A guy got out with a blonde on his arm. He came in and sat on one of the pink and tan booths. Dorothy couldn't help noticing him. He was all flash. He was wearing a long blonde fur coat and a lizard skin boots with spurs. Okay. His black hair was carefully groomed. He had sideburns and a mustache. Dorothy served him. "What's your name?" he asked her. "The Big Bad Wolf." He wanted a strawberry sundae supreme. I was in a good mood, Dorothy remembered, so I made him a huge tower out of it. I didn't even realize what it would make him think. I wasn't the type who makes passes at guys. Yeah, he didn't think so either. He just 100% used that as an excuse. Guys can be so effing creepy and manipulative. A few days later, one of Dorothy's girlfriends phoned her. Some guy called at the Dairy Queen and said he had a date with Dorothy that evening. He wanted her number. The girlfriend wouldn't give it to him, so he gave her his. He wanted Dorothy to call him. Also manipulative. Dorothy thought about it and mentioned it to her mother. Nellie told her not to call. Dorothy didn't often disobey her mother. This time, though, she did. When the guy mentioned the Sunday Supreme, she remembered him. His name was, okay, we're going to call him Snively the Spider. That's his name. And he wanted to take her out. She told him she was sick. He said he'd phone the next day, and he did. She was still too sick, but the day after that, she got up enough nerve to say yes. The time finally came. He pulled into the driveway, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I opened the door and watched him walk towards me. I was stunned, but also embarrassed. I knew I wasn't the girl he expected to see. "You look nice," he said, but I could tell he was trying to cover his shock. I was wearing gray pants and a black top. He had on a long leather coat with a fur collar, two of the biggest diamond rings I'd ever seen, and a necklace with a huge diamond-studded star and a gold bracelet with his initials picked out in diamonds. Ooh, you know what? We're going to black out the initials too. Ugh, fuck you. I wanted to disappear, but she didn't disappear. She put on her coat and walked out to Spider's car and got in. He did all the talking as they drove. Twice he touched her hand. He took her to his apartment on 15th Avenue. It was a glitzy, fake opulent bachelor pad with a modern building and a balcony outside a sliding glass door. Dorothy was wide-eyed. It had plants everywhere, almost like an indoor jungle, and a huge skylight, fur rugs, a closet with a full mirror, and a big platform bed. It reminded her of beautiful homes she had seen on TV. It reminded her of big stars and famous people. She couldn't believe she was actually there. Spider cooked dinner for them and served his favorite wine. He told her he was a big promoter. He put on car shows, he said. In awed silence, Dorothy wondered what he was doing taking out a waitress from Dairy Queen. He asked her if she had any nice dresses to go out in. She didn't reply, but she guessed he knew the answer. In the living room after dinner, he played the guitar and sang songs he said he'd written himself. He moved closer. They kissed. He told Dorothy he felt the same things she did. She didn't have to say them. He knew. He said their lips were made for each other. What a creepy skeezer. Oh my God. Only a stupid young girl without any experience would fall for this bullshit. Oh, I feel so bad for her. But in her position, like when I was that age, I 100% would have gone for that too. Because I was so dumb and desperate to be loved. Oh God. I was being sweet-talked by an expert, she would write, but I wanted to hear more. Spider was saying all the romantic things that the boys she dated at Centennial had never said. She wished this evening would never end. Nellie had disliked Spider on sight. She thought he looked like trouble. When Dorothy didn't come home as expected, Nellie became frightened. She drove to the police station. She told the officer on duty she was afraid her daughter had been kidnapped by the mafia. The officer calmed her down and suggested she call home. She did, and Dorothy was there. You shouldn't have worried, Mom, Dorothy told her mother. We just drove around. Nellie was so relieved to find Dorothy safe that instead of scolding her, she promised her daughter she'd give up smoking. Oh my gosh. Also, I totally love Dorothy. I think she was a very innocent, kind soul. But one thing that we do have to recognize about her is that Dorothy is very comfortable deceiving people. She is very comfortable lying to her mom. She's very comfortable doing things and not telling anyone about it. She is skilled in that. At that age, I was not. I was the worst deceiver of them all. But okay. I just think it's good to point out good and negative or neutral things about her personality because Dorothy was a person. She wasn't some saint on earth, a floating angel who then floated away. She was a human being, and she had negative aspects as well as positive, and I think it does her no justice to make her into something that she was not. So in my criticism, please understand that I'm not trying to be a bitch about it. I'm trying to make her a whole person. Anyway. Dorothy felt guilty about her first date with Spider because she had started seeing Craig, the boy she had met on Whistler Mountain. She didn't know if Spider would ever call her again, but if he did, she intended to tell him that she already had a boyfriend, sort of, and so she couldn't see him anymore. Spider called Dorothy and Dorothy told him, but Spider wasn't the sort to take no for an answer. One afternoon, he drove her to tiny Como Lake, not far from her house. Isn't that the name of the lake where Gianni Versace grew up? Like Como, something? Lake Como, no? If we like each other, we should be able to see each other, he told her. Let your heart take you where you want it to go. Don't fool yourself with logic. Happiness comes from the heart, not the brain. Spoken like a true cult leader. Spider. Whoop. Oh no. I went to the wrong page. F. Oh no. Did I? Oh no, I didn't. Okay, we're okay. Sorry, everyone. You can see both Craig and me until you know who you really want. By being fair and faithful to Craig, you're actually cheating yourself, said Spider. How interesting, Spider. Well, remember you said that. Dorothy listened in silence, but she knew Spider was right. She thought Spider was right. She didn't love Craig, and she thought there must be more to life and love than what she had discovered so far. I just followed my heart, she would remember. For the first time in my life, I worried about myself without worrying about hurting someone else. She had one more date with Craig, and when he parked her car in a small mountain road and started kissing her, she told him she wanted to go home. Dorothy knew she wasn't the only girl in Spider's life, but she stayed at home waiting for him to call. At first, the calls came infrequently, but they increased as Spider's interest in his latest teenage conquest grew. He gave her presents, dresses, pantyhose. Pantyhose? If a dude gave me pantyhose, I'd probably give him a side-eye. High-heeled shoes. He bought her makeup and got angry if she forgot to put it on when they were going out. Dorothy's family hated Spider. They thought he was rude, self-centered, and obnoxious, and they said so. The more Nellie and the two younger children argued against Spider, the more Dorothy defended him. Spider banged the door against Johnny's bicycle coming into the house. He made himself at home on Nellie's couch, parked his boots on her coffee table. Nellie thought he must be into something crooked. He always had money to spend without working for it. 10-year-old Louise couldn't understand why her sister was spending so much time with Spider instead of the family. One night, Dorothy tried to explain, but Louise became angry and started to cry. Dorothy persisted. Even though the family disliked Spider, she said, she loved him, and he made her happy. He was the first person ever to make her feel attractive or important, she said. Dorothy asked Louise if they cared for her happiness or if they were only thinking of themselves. Louise said she understood and that she was sorry. They hugged each other, and Dorothy helped her sister dry her tears. Dave Redlick saw Spider talking to Dorothy at the Dairy Queen one day. From then on, Spider waited for her outside in his car. Dave knew the bastard and didn't want him hanging around. They'd both been part of the heavy-duty biker crowd in their younger days around the East End, members of a cycle club called the Trojans. Dave had gone into the bar business, and now he owned and managed his own Dairy Queen. Wow, that's a ride. Spider had dropped out of school when he was 14, and he'd been in trouble ever since. He started hanging out in Vancouver's night world, Hornby Street and Gastown, districts of discos, bars, and strip joints, studying the pimps. When he thought he was ready, he started small-time pimping himself, a girl here, a girl there, pimping and promoting. He groomed girls to become strippers. Spider backhanded one of his girls in a club called Oil Can Harry's one night and got slugged and turned by the bouncer. He burst into tears. I never felt so protected in my life as I did at the strip club. If any of those guys tried to fuck with me, the bouncers were there. I loved the strip club. Spider sought the company of the city's pimps, who bought him drinks and tried to woo his girls away. He liked flashy cars and began promoting car shows in and around Vancouver. He acquired a Cadillac with etched windows. He acquired a Bentley that he converted into a Rolls-Royce? What? How do you do that? With the switch of a radiator grill. Oh, how funny. He was handy at metalworking. He'd customized motorcycles in his biker days. One of his scams was duplicating metal sculptures and photographs from serious artist work. Okay, why are we talking about him? Yeah, he was a pimp. That's all we need to know about him. He was a loser. Oh, one of Spider's girls was also the girlfriend of a narcotics dealer who was serving a short jail sentence. Spider and the girl ran through $15,000 of the man's money. When the dealer got out, he hung Spider by his heels from a top floor window of a downtown hotel, just like a spider. What a dick. Spider paid the dealer with borrowed money and left town fearing for his life. He spent the next year in San Francisco and Las Vegas, then drifted down to Los Angeles. During the summer of '77, he promoted 2 car shows in LA. They both flopped, leaving a number of unhappy investors. When Spider returned to Vancouver, he concentrated on car shows and similar promotional schemes, avoiding any serious trouble. He was afraid someone would have him taken care of if he didn't. Dave Redlick figured Spider for a thoroughly bad guy. He warned Dorothy to stay away from him. Dorothy looked up to Dave, but she didn't see how he could be right about Spider. The Spider Dave told her about wasn't the Spider she knew. She thought people misunderstood him. If Spider had made mistakes, they were a thing of the past. Dorothy's friend Cheryl disagreed. One night at Pharaoh's, a Gastown disco, she watched Dorothy sit quietly at their table while Spider danced with one woman after another. Cheryl joked that when Spider told Dorothy to jump, she asked how high. Spider told Dorothy to stop seeing Cheryl, and Dorothy complied. Dorothy, what are you doing? In a year, we're going to find Dorothy dead in an alley, Cheryl predicted. Just before graduation, Dorothy quit the Dairy Queen. Dave Redlick expected she would. Most of his girls did that when they graduated. On her last day, he gave her a bouquet of roses. She graduated from Centennial in a long, white, low-cut dress. Nellie didn't like the dress. Oh, Spider had given her. Nellie didn't like the dress. Her standards of modesty were old world standards. She hadn't seen her daughter naked since Dorothy was a little girl. The dress and Spider's rudeness ruined the graduation for Nellie. Okay, so great. That's why, remember how Dorothy said she didn't know what there was to be ashamed of, but she felt ashamed? Probably the environment that she was raised in. I haven't seen my daughter naked since she was a baby. What a weird thing to say. That's weird. I'm sorry. I do not approve of modesty standards. They are incredibly harmful, in my humble opinion. Okay, where was I? Sorry, I can't help it stating my opinion or my head explodes. On the way to her graduation dance, Spider took Dorothy to the studio of photographer Uwe Meyer, and she posed for her first formal portrait. The British Columbia Telephone Company hired Dorothy as a clerk typist in early July. She was proud of her new job at BC Tel, but she was beginning to take steps toward a life beyond Vancouver. In the summer of 1978, Playboy was engaged in the Great Playmate Hunt, a highly publicized search for the girl to be featured in the centerfold of the magazine's 25th anniversary issue. Dorothy didn't really believe she was beautiful. When people stared at her on the street, she wondered if her makeup was smeared or her dress was torn. Spider convinced her to take the chance. One afternoon, she posed for a nude test shooting by Meyer in Spider's apartment. Spider had promised Meyer the $1,000 Playmate Finder fee if Dorothy was accepted, but he later reneged on his promise. He used Meyer's photographs to interest the better-known Vancouver photographer Ken Honey into shooting her. Honey had already discovered several Canadian girls who had become playmates. Ken would agree to do a test shooting only if Dorothy's mother co-signed the model release. Nellie was away at the time, visiting her mother in Holland, but Spider returned with a signature and Ken proceeded with the plans for the test. Dorothy liked Ken Honey. She couldn't believe he was a photographer. He was dignified and polite. She thought he looked like somebody's grandfather. They scheduled the shooting for late afternoon after she finished work at BC Tel. Spider couldn't be there. He was busy setting up one of his car shows. Posing for Honey was easier than Dorothy had expected. She wasn't nervous this time. Spider's absence helped. The only anxious moment came when Ken suggested some shots on the balcony before they lost the late afternoon light. They attracted the attention of a couple guys in the next building. Dorothy panicked, covering herself with a towel. It took Ken 10 minutes to persuade me to take the towel back off again, she remembered. Ken had the film processed. The next day, he mailed a dozen color transparencies to Marilyn Grabowski, Playboy's West Coast photo editor in Los Angeles. Marilyn's secretary logged in the package on August 11, 1978. Along with the photographs, Ken sent a standard Playmate data sheet filled out by Dorothy. She described herself as shy, very sensitive, romantic, fussy. She said that she hoped the Playmate experience would help her gain more confidence in herself. In the space intended for her father's name, she wrote, "Parents divorced." For her father's occupation, she put, "Whereabouts unknown." Her career ambitions were simple. "I would like to become a star of sorts." Marilyn was impressed by the photos. She thought Dorothy deserved a serious consideration in the 25th anniversary Playmate hunt, which would end August 31st. Glamour photographer Mario Caselli, who had photographed more Playmate centerfolds in the previous 2 decades than any other man in the world, was available that weekend. Marilyn called Ken Honey in Vancouver and asked him to arrange for Dorothy to fly to LA on Sunday morning. Ken found Dorothy working as a cashier at Spider's car show. When he told her the news, she was ecstatic. Not Spider. He was annoyed. He was in the middle of a show and couldn't trust anyone but Dorothy to handle the cash. He didn't want her to go to LA alone, as Ken advised she should. Spider never liked a deal unless he had all the control. He thought Dorothy's career was his deal. It was the biggest decision Dorothy had ever faced. Her mother wasn't there to help her decide. She asked her 16-year-old brother John without telling him that the offer came from Playboy. John, who despised Spider, was suspicious. He told his sister not to go. She drove down to the East End and talked to a friend of her mother's who was like an aunt to her. Dorothy then made up her mind to go to LA. Should we do this in 2 parts? This is awful long. No, let's keep going. Let's just do it. Let's do it. On Sunday morning, Dorothy flew to Los Angeles. She had never been in a plane before. When the jet took off, she pressed her face to the window and was still pressed to the window when she landed at LAX 2.5 hours later. A long black limousine was waiting for her. She had never seen a limousine up close, much less ridden in one. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. The chauffeur tried to make quiet conversation, but Dorothy just got quieter and quieter. Marilyn Grabowski arrived at the Playboy building on Sunset Boulevard just as Dorothy's limousine was pulling up. As impressed as Marilyn had been with Ken Honey's test shooting, she wasn't prepared for the real thing. Dorothy was very blonde and very tall. She wore a simple but quite smashing black jumpsuit, Marilyn remembers. My first impression as she got out of the limousine was this was not an unusual experience for her. As I walked up to her and introduced myself, I realized I was wrong. I remember thinking, here is a very young woman playing grown-up. Her vulnerability drew an immediate protective response from me. We went into my office and chatted while we waited for Mario Caselli to arrive. Actually, I chatted. Dorothy hardly said a word except in response to direct questions. I certainly didn't see any of the unique personality that would emerge in the months ahead. But whatever her inner feelings were, there was always that wonderfully engaging smile. Mario and Dorothy spent the afternoon shooting at his studio in a converted public library building in Altadena, a suburb of Los Angeles. Dorothy wrote in her journal, I was a little shy, standing stark naked in front of a stranger, but after a while I became more relaxed and got into it. I could even say it was fun. She napped on the drive back to LA. Marilyn had called Caselli to return Dorothy to her office after the photo session. Dorothy would be staying at the guest house of Playboy Mansion West. Because of her shyness, Marilyn wanted to accompany her there and help with the introductions. The big iron gate slowly opened, Dorothy would write, remembering her first visit to the Playboy Mansion. The scenery was incredible. There was a forest surrounding the winding drive. Then I saw the mansion. I had never seen anything so huge. I felt like I had just walked into a storybook. The mansion is a Gothic castle on a wooded hill with marble statuary, fountains, and waterfalls. There is even a wishing well. Dorothy and Oz, about to meet the wizard. Okay, actually, my mouth is getting tired from talking so much, from reading all this. So I'm going to take a little break and I will come right back and I'll probably just like splice the two together, or I only do this all on my phone. It's a pain. And so I'll just post this and post the next one right after, okay? Get ready for part 2.